Ever had that urge to just disappear? Not in a morbid way, not really, more like to just vanish. Turn off your phone, close all the doors, and land somewhere nobody knows you, where no expectations can reach you. Ever woken up in the morning and, before your eyes are even fully open, felt that weight settle in your chest? That feeling that the day ahead is going to be exactly like the one before, just like yesterday, just like all the ones that came before it. An endless loop of soulless motions you go through, but don't actually feel. You get up, brush your teeth, look in the mirror, and for a fleeting second you wonder who that person staring back is. They look tired in a way sleep just won't fix. They seem to be carrying something that doesn't have a precise name but weighs like lead, and the day has barely even started. This urge to disappear is something people rarely say out loud, because it sounds scary. It sounds like weakness. It sounds ungrateful when, from the outside, your life looks perfectly fine. You've got a job, people around you, maybe food on the table and a roof over your head. And still, there's this persistent emptiness that doesn't respond to any of the obvious solutions the world offers. You've tried distracting yourself with binge-watching shows. You've tried numbing the feeling with food, with alcohol, with shopping, with endless scrolling on social media at 2 in the morning. You've tried convincing yourself it was just tiredness, that it would pass, that everyone feels this way sometimes, but it doesn't pass. And every time you're in a crowded place, at a meeting, a party, a family dinner, that feeling follows you. You're physically present but absent in a way nobody around you seems to notice, and that invisibility hurts in a way words can't capture. What I want to tell you today is that this urge to disappear isn't a sign of madness. It's not a character flaw. It's not ingratitude. It is, in fact, a silent scream from the deepest part of you, the part that hasn't given up on finding something real, something true, something that's worth the effort, of continuing to exist with presence, not just with the autopilot of everyday life. And it was precisely this scream that Viktor Frankl spent his entire life trying to understand and answer. Not with easy answers, not with empty motivational platitudes, but with something he witnessed in the most brutal way possible. That even in the worst suffering a human being can endure, there's a capacity to find meaning that cannot be destroyed from the outside. That discovery changed 20th century psychology, and it can change something very important within you today. Viktor Frankl was born in Vienna in 1905, and from a young age, he displayed an extraordinary mind focused on the deepest questions of human existence. As a teenager, he corresponded with Sigmund Freud, which in itself reveals the extraordinary intellectual caliber of that young man. But even while admiring Freud, Frankl felt something fundamental was missing in psychoanalytic theory, something that Freud, with all his genius, had overlooked. Freud viewed humans as fundamentally motivated by pleasure, by the satisfaction of repressed impulses, by the reduction of internal tension. It was a mechanistic view, elegant in its logic, but it left out a dimension that Frankl would call the noetic, the specifically human dimension of spirit, of freedom, of responsibility, and the search for meaning. This disagreement wasn't merely academic for Frankl, it was existential. He saw in his patients something that no theory of instincts could adequately explain. People who had everything they should want, according to any theory of motivation based on pleasure or power, and yet they suffered from a profound, inexplicable emptiness, a sense that something essential was missing, that life was being lived but not truly inhabited. Frankl called this phenomenon existential vacuum, and he identified it as the source of many modern neuroses he saw proliferating, especially in 20th century Western societies. The existential vacuum isn't clinical depression in the conventional sense. It's not necessarily the result of childhood traumas or unresolved conflicts with parental figures. It's something different and more specific. It's the experience of not knowing why you exist, of not having a purpose to guide your choices, of finding nothing that genuinely deserves your deepest commitment. Frankl described patients who came to his office saying they felt like they were inside a machine, performing expected functions, but with no real connection to what they were doing. They had success, they had relationships, they had leisure activities, but everything felt as if it were behind glass, a life observed from a distance even while being lived. What Frankl realized, and this is crucial to understanding everything that follows, is that this vacuum doesn't arise simply because life doesn't offer meaning. It arises because people stop actively seeking meaning, or because they seek it in the wrong places, in immediate gratifications, in achievements the world approves of, in momentary pleasures that numb but don't nourish. And when meaning isn't found, when this search remains empty for long enough, the person develops what Frankl called a neugenic neurosis, a neurosis not rooted in the Freudian unconscious, but in the emptiness of the spiritual dimension, in the absence of something worth living for. This neurosis manifests exactly like that urge to disappear you might be feeling. It's the human being trying to escape a life that has lost its dimension of depth. And here I want to pause and really talk with you. I know many of you watching this video carry this feeling in silence for a long time, this urge to simply disappear for a while, to stop everything. Perhaps because you're exhausted from pretending everything is okay, or because you genuinely can't find enough reason to keep pushing yourself with the intensity life seems to demand. Tell me in the comments here, have you ever felt this urge to disappear, to just stop everything for a while and not really know why? If you have, just right here, I want to disappear sometimes, nothing more than that. Because by doing that, you're saying out loud something you've carried in silence, and you can be sure that as you read this in the comments, dozens of other people will feel that relief of recognizing they're not alone in this. Often the most liberating thing is simply seeing written by someone else exactly what you feel but couldn't name. You are not alone in this. And the fact that you're here, trying to understand this feeling instead of just running from it, already says something very important about who you are. What makes Frankl's thinking so remarkably relevant to understanding this urge to disappear is that he didn't treat it as a pathology to be eliminated, but as a symptom to be understood. When someone wants to vanish from the world as it is, it means that on some deep level, that person still has an intuition that the world could be different, that life could have a quality they haven't yet found. It's almost paradoxical. The desire to disappear contains within it a refusal to accept superficiality. It contains a demand for more, and that demand, according to Frankl, is what's most specifically human about us. Animals don't feel existential emptiness. A cow in a field doesn't experience the anguish of not knowing what it exists for. This specific suffering, this crisis of meaning, is the painful privilege of creatures capable of asking about their own purpose. But Frankl had to go far beyond theory to reach the most transformative discoveries of his work. In 1942, he and his family were deported to the Nazi concentration camps. His wife, his parents, his brother, almost everyone would die in the camps. He himself went through Auschwitz, Dachau, and other camps, living in the most extreme conditions of dehumanization modern history records. Before being deported, he had hidden the manuscript of a book he was writing inside the lining of his coat. When he arrived at the camp and they took everything from him, including that coat, he lost the manuscript. And in that moment, Frankl made a decision that defines everything. He decided that if he survived, he would reconstruct that book from memory, and that he would survive. Not because he had guarantees, not because the situation offered any rational hope, but because he had a purpose. He had something that needed to be done that only he could do. And this distinction between those who found some purpose to continue and those who succumbed was something Frankl systematically observed in the camps, transforming an experience of absolute horror into a discovery about human nature that no laboratory could have produced. In the camps, Frankl observed that the capacity to survive didn't primarily depend on physical strength, didn't depend on luck alone, didn't necessarily depend on who was younger or stronger. It depended consistently and disturbingly on who found a reason to go on. He saw strong men collapse in days, while physically weaker men found inexplicable reserves of resilience because they had someone waiting for them, a job to complete, a responsibility they couldn't abandon. And that's where Frankl arrived at the core of his theory. Human beings can bear almost any how if they have a strong enough why. This phrase, which he borrowed from Nietzsche but filled with entirely new content from his lived experience, would become the heart of all logotherapy. Logotherapy, the therapeutic system Frankl developed before, during, and after the camps, starts from a premise that seems simple but has enormous implications. The primary motivation of human beings is not the pursuit of pleasure, as Freud said, nor the pursuit of power, as Adler said, but the pursuit of meaning. And this meaning isn't something we arbitrarily invent. It's not a fiction we create to console ourselves. It's something we discover, something we find in the world, in relationships, in work, even in suffering. When we approach existence with the posture of someone actively asking, "What is life asking of me now? What can I do that only I can do, that has real value, that justifies the effort of staying present instead of disappearing?" If these ideas are resonating with you, if you feel like someone is finally talking about what you experience deep inside but can rarely put into words, subscribe to this channel. Here every week, we explore the thinking of Frankl and other humanists who offer not ready-made answers, because ready-made answers don't work for real existential questions, but genuine tools for you to find your own specific answers. The crisis of meaning you're experiencing won't be resolved with a 3-minute motivational video, but it can begin to dissolve when you gain regular access to a type of thinking that takes the depth of what you're living seriously. Click the subscribe button now. You don't have to go on this journey alone, and this channel exists precisely to be that space for honest and profound reflection. Returning to the heart of Frankl's thought, it's important to understand what he meant by finding meaning, because this idea is often misunderstood. Meaning for Frankl is not happiness. It's not the absence of pain. It's not that pleasant feeling of well-being that contemporary cultures have turned into the ultimate goal of existence. Frankl said something that sounds almost provocative to modern ears. We should not seek happiness, because the more we seek it directly, the more it eludes us. Happiness is a side effect of a meaningful life, not a goal pursued head-on. When you live with genuine purpose, when you commit to something beyond yourself, happiness appears as a consequence, not as the result of a strategy to obtain it. This explains something many of you might recognize: the moments when you felt most alive, most present, most real, were probably not moments of pure pleasure or comfort. They were moments when you were deeply committed to something, absorbed in a task that mattered, present in a genuine encounter with another person, or navigating suffering with an attitude that transformed pain into growth. This understanding leads us to one of the most important distinctions in all of logotherapy: the difference between what Frankl called a life of pleasure and a life of meaning. In a life of pleasure, the goal is to maximize pleasant experiences and minimize discomfort. It's a life our consumer culture knows very well, and it's precisely the model of existence that is failing so many people. Because pleasure is temporarily satisfying, but doesn't truly nourish. A child eating sugar all the time never develops a palate for complex flavors. A person who seeks only comfort and pleasure never develops the capacity to find meaning in the places where true meaning resides, which are often difficult, demanding places that require real commitment. A life of meaning, on the other hand, doesn't require you to be constantly comfortable or happy. It demands that you be committed, present, and responsible for something that extends beyond your immediate well-being. Frankl identified 3 main avenues through which humans can find meaning, and it's incredibly useful to know them because they function as a map for those feeling lost in the void. The first avenue is through creative achievements, work, accomplishments. When you create something, when you contribute something genuinely yours to the world, when you execute a task with excellence and real dedication, you are tapping into meaning through action. This doesn't mean your work has to be grand or famous. A carpenter who makes a chair with genuine artisanal care is finding meaning to the same extent as a composer writing a symphony. The criterion isn't the social scale of the achievement, but the quality of commitment to it. Frankl saw many people doing important jobs by social standards, but without any real commitment, going through the motions completely robotically, and these people suffered from the same emptiness as someone unemployed. And he saw people in jobs considered humble, who performed them with such dedication and care that it transformed that activity into a genuine source of meaning. The second avenue is through experiences, encounters, love. When you are genuinely present in an encounter with another person, when you truly see them, when you allow the reality of another person to reach and move you, you are tapping into meaning. Love for Frankl wasn't a passive emotion that happens to you. It was a form of perception, a capacity to see in another the possibilities they might not see in themselves, and to commit to the realization of those possibilities. He used to say that when we truly love someone, we see who that person can become, not just who they are now. And this act of loving perception is itself a way of finding meaning, both for the one who loves and, when the love is reciprocated, for the one who is loved. This avenue also includes the experience of beauty, of wonder in the face of nature, art, music. Frankl described moments in the concentration camps themselves when prisoners would look at the red sunset over the snow and find, for a few instants, a beauty that made existence bearable. This capacity to be touched by beauty even in extreme suffering is, for Frankl, a manifestation of the human noetic dimension, that part of us that the camps could brutalize but not completely destroy. The third avenue is the most paradoxical and perhaps the most profound. It is through the attitude we adopt in the face of unavoidable suffering. Frankl was very clear. He wasn't romanticizing suffering. He wasn't saying we should seek to suffer or that pain has value in itself. When suffering can be avoided, it should be avoided, and it would be masochistic to accept it unnecessarily. But when suffering is unavoidable, when you face an irreversible loss, an incurable illness, a circumstance that cannot be changed by any effort or strategy, then the only freedom that remains is the freedom to choose the attitude with which you will carry that weight. And that freedom, however small it may seem, is absolute. No one can take away from you the way you decide to respond internally to what happens to you. This was the insight Frankl validated under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Even in a concentration camp, where everything was controlled by the tormentors, the prisoner's inner response remained their own. Those who found a way to maintain internal dignity, to not let external brutality destroy their capacity to choose how to react, were the ones who preserved something essentially human, even amidst systematic dehumanization. This understanding has enormous implications for the desire to disappear we were discussing earlier. When you feel that urge to vanish, to stop everything, there's a temptation to interpret it as a sign that there's no way out, that the situation is hopeless, that you are somehow incapable of handling what life demands. But Frankl offers a completely different reading. That desire to disappear can be the moment you are on the verge of an important discovery about what truly matters to you. Because when we reach the point where the world as it is seems unbearable, we are forced into radical honesty about what has been missing, about what kind of life we would like to live, about which commitments and relationships and accomplishments could give us the feeling that the effort of existing is worthwhile. Frankl discovered something even deeper about human nature that is directly related to this state. He called self-distancing the specifically human capacity to separate oneself from oneself, to observe one's own states, thoughts and emotions from a perspective that is not completely identified with them. When you feel the urge to disappear, you are not that urge. You are the being experiencing that urge who can observe it, question it, understand it. And that small distinction, which might seem purely theoretical, is in practice immensely liberating, because it means you always have a perspective available that isn't completely captured by the state you're living through. There's always a part of you that can ask, what is this feeling telling me? What is it asking for? What would be different if I didn't feel this emptiness? And those questions can be the beginning of a path back to a life that is not just worth tolerating, but genuinely worth living. Complementary to self-distancing is what Frankl called self-transcendence, and this is perhaps his most counterintuitive finding for a culture obsessed with self-knowledge and personal development. Self-transcendence is the observation that human beings find their fullest realization, not when they are focused on themselves, but when they are directed towards something or someone beyond themselves. When you are completely absorbed in a task that matters, when you are deeply present in an encounter with another person, when you are committed to a cause that is bigger than your individual interests, you paradoxically become more yourself. The self is found not by looking directly at itself, but by looking outward, at the world, at others, and in that outward movement discovering its own deepest possibilities. This explains why so much isolation, so much rumination, so much focus on our own internal states often exacerbates the emptiness rather than resolving it. It's not that introspection is bad, it's just that it needs to be paired with a movement toward the world, toward others, toward projects and relationships that pull us out of the vicious cycle of the self trying to find itself by looking only inward. In clinical practice, Frankl developed specific techniques for working with existential emptiness and its manifestations. One is paradoxical intention, which works especially well with anxieties and phobias. Instead of trying to escape what they fear, patients are invited to desire exactly that, or at least to make light of it. Someone with extreme social anxiety, instead of trying to control their trembling hands when speaking in public, is instructed to try to tremble as much as possible, to show everyone present how they can shake when they want to. This paradoxical move often breaks the cycle of anxiety precisely because it disarms the fear of fear, the anticipation of the symptom, which is often more paralyzing than the symptom itself. Another technique is dereflection, which involves redirecting the patient's attention from themselves to the potential meaning available in their current situation. Instead of obsessively examining their internal states, the patient learns to ask, what is this situation asking of me? What can I do now that has real value, that contributes to something beyond myself? What makes these techniques different from purely cognitive or behavioral approaches is that they don't just try to modify dysfunctional thoughts or behaviors. They work with the deeper dimension of human existence, with the question of meaning, with each person's responsibility for their own life. Frankl was explicit in saying that the therapist cannot give meaning to the patient. No technique can do that. What the therapist can do is help the patient remove the obstacles that are blocking their capacity to discover the meaning that is available in their unique and unrepeatable situation. Because Frankl insisted that every life has a unique, specific meaning, which can only be lived by that person, in those circumstances, at that moment. There is no universal formula for meaning that you can apply to your life like a recipe. There is your particular meaning, which you need to discover through attentive listening to what your life is asking of you now. But there is an important objection that needs to be faced honestly, because Frankl's thought, like any philosophical or therapeutic system, has its limits and legitimate criticisms. Some criticize Frankl by saying that his emphasis on the human capacity to find meaning, even in the worst circumstances, can inadvertently serve to minimize structural injustices, or to blame those who cannot find meaning in situations of real oppression. If you can always choose your attitude, what about people who live in conditions that systematically destroy any possibility of exercising that inner freedom? It's a legitimate criticism, and Frankl acknowledged that external conditions matter enormously. He wasn't saying that we should passively accept the injustices of the world, or that anyone in any circumstance finds it easy to find meaning. He was saying that even when everything else is taken away, this capacity remains potentially available, and that it can be the difference between collapse and survival in extreme circumstances. Which doesn't mean we blame victims for their suffering, but rather that we don't reduce them entirely to victims without any capacity for agency, however small. Another honest limitation of the Franklian system is that it tends to be more accessible to people who already have a certain degree of basic stability, who are not in the midst of an acute crisis or a severe neurological or psychiatric condition that compromises their very ability to make choices. Logotherapy works best in combination with other approaches when necessary, not as a substitute for medical or psychiatric treatments when they are indicated. Frankl was a physician and understood this very well, always integrating his existential approach with conventional clinical care when needed. This honesty about the approach's limits is itself part of Frankl's intellectual legacy, who never intended to have the answer to everything, but rather to have identified a dimension of human existence that had been neglected and needed to be taken seriously. Let's return now to that starting point, that feeling of wanting to disappear that you might carry. What Frankl offers us isn't a promise that the feeling will magically vanish if you simply decide your life has meaning. It doesn't work like that. What he offers is a perspective that transforms the very meaning of that feeling. The urge to disappear, when examined through the Franklian lens, is not a sign that something is irremediably wrong with you. It's a sign that the deepest dimension of you, what Frankl called the noetic or spiritual dimension, is asking for attention. It's asking you to stop living on autopilot, to honestly ask yourself what truly matters to you, to examine if your life is aligned with the deepest values you carry, even if you can't clearly name them. This question, what truly matters to me, is the most frightening and most liberating question there is. Frightening because it compels an honesty that may reveal you've been living in ways that don't correspond to who you actually are or what you value. Liberating because it opens up the possibility of starting over, not with a grand dramatic revolution, but with small conscious choices in the direction of what has real value. Frankl used to say that meaning can be found at any moment, even in the most mundane, when we approach the situation with the right question. Instead of asking, what do I want from life? Ask, what is life asking of me now? Instead of waiting for meaning to arrive as a revelation from above, go out to meet it in daily tasks, in present relationships, in challenges we didn't choose, but can approach in different ways. When you feel the urge to disappear, something serious is happening within you, as the title suggests. But serious doesn't mean hopeless. Serious means important. It means your psyche, your spirit, your deepest dimension is asking you to pay attention. It's asking you not to continue on the autopilot of a life that doesn't correspond to who you most deeply are. And this listening, however painful it may be at first, can be the beginning of a real transformation. Not the dramatic transformation of self-help movies, but that quiet, profound shift that happens when a person stops running from the toughest questions and starts inhabiting them with honesty and courage. Frankl survived the camps. He lost almost everything. He rebuilt the book he had lost. He became one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. And he did it all not because he was a superhuman without flaws, but because he had a why that survived conditions that tried to destroy everything. You might not be facing anything close to what Frankl faced, but the question he lived is the same one at the heart of your discomfort. What is my purpose? What is my life asking of me? And what am I truly willing to commit to, not superficially, but with the best of myself, so that the answer to this question is something I can look at with respect and dignity? If this video resonated with something real in you, If you feel these ideas open up a new perspective on something you've been carrying for a while, hit that like button now. This simple gesture helps more people going through the same thing find this content when they need it most. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this conversation doesn't end here. Every week we bring the thinking of Frankl and other humanists to issues you're probably facing right now, not in a distant academic way, but in a way that connects these deep ideas to the real texture of your everyday life. You've already shown enough courage to get this far, to sit with these difficult questions instead of running from them. This channel is for people like you who prefer the challenge of an examined life to the comfortable superficiality of a life not truly lived. Come be a part of this community, and the next time you feel that urge to disappear, maybe you'll remember that it can be, as Frankl taught us, not the end of something, but the beginning of a quest that's worth every difficult step of the way.